Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashley, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. Welcome back to the Crystal Library on Big Crystal Energy. Yay for the Crystal Library. I'm sorry I missed last week. I have just been so sick. It's been crazy bad. So now I am back to life and I'm feeling good. I'm actually coming at you from a hotel in Portland, Oregon. I'm here for the Spirit Northwest conference. So this room is really big and there might be echo. So I apologize for that. But I'm recording on the go because life has been so intensely and insanely chaotic that I'm just doing the best that I can. So just bear with me. I have this conference this weekend, which I haven't even really been able to share with you guys because I've just been so discombobulated. But I'm here at Spirit Northwest and I'm going to get to meet Jenny C. Bell. I'm going to get to meet Samantha Rose Hicks and Sarah from Green Moon Witchery, who have all been former podcast guests. And by the time this episode comes out, the conference will already have been over. So I will share with you on an upcoming episode how the conference went. This is my first witchy conference. This is my first time being in a room with so many magical people. I'm kind of like sweaty thinking about it because the conference starts in a few hours. But I'm just really, really excited. But today I wanted to do an episode that I have been getting requests for the Crystal Library, Chrysocolla. So Chrysocolla is a stone that is, I would say, it's not new to me. I've known about it probably only for 3 years. When I first went to get my first Reiki session ever, after the Reiki session, the woman that did my session, she pulled a card for me out of her Crystal Spirits Oracle deck. And the card she pulled for me was Chrysocolla. And I was like, oh, wow, that is such an interesting stone. I've never heard of it. Granted, I was not new to crystals, but I didn't know all the crystals. I still don't know all of them, obviously, but I didn't know that one. And so I love the message of it. Sorry, my eyes are watering up. I'm so excited. I'm crying. Anyway, so after I had that Reiki session, I then went to a crystal shop that was close to the Reiki studio, and I bought my first piece of Chrysocolla, just a templed stone. And I've just really loved that stone ever since that time. And so I thought, well, today would be a great day to do an episode all about it. So let's do it. I have notes. I have them on my phone because obviously I could not. They're on my phone, guys. So if you see me looking down a lot, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best, okay? I'm doing my best. I've been researching. I was just at Powell's Books. I was putting the final touches on this episode, doing some research at the bookshop that's here, the famous Powell's Books. And so now I'm ready, okay? I've got the whole episode formatted, written, ready to roll. If you've been into the crystal world for any length of time, you've probably heard the same 2 or 3 sentences about Chrysocolla. It's a communication stone, and it's calming, and it's feminine energy. Maybe someone told you it's good for the throat chakra. Okay. And here's what I want to say about that. None of that is wrong, but all of it together is dangerously incomplete. Because what those descriptions leave out is the entire reason this stone has been considered sacred for thousands of years. And it has nothing to do with speaking more gently, okay? It has to do with a very specific kind of power. And the kind that most of us, especially most of us listeners, are women, have been trained not to recognize as power at all. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's start with the name. So, Chrysocolla comes from Greek. Chrysos meaning gold, and colla meaning glue. Gold glue. Okay. Which is interesting because when you think of chrysocolla, you think of like a green or a blue color, right? So not a golden stone, not the color of gold, gold glue, the substance that holds gold together, right? So Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist who was writing in the 1st century CE, used this word to describe a mineral that ancient goldsmiths used to solder and bind pieces of gold. Chrysocolla wasn't the gold. It was the thing that made the gold whole. Okay. I want you to sit with that for a second because I think it completely reframes what this stone is here to teach us. We live in a spiritual culture that's obsessed with becoming gold, becoming your highest self, your most radiant version, your fullest expression. And there's nothing wrong with having aspirations, of course, but Chrysocolla is asking a different question entirely. What if your purpose, your actual sacred function, is to be the invisible binding force that makes gold possible for everyone around you? Okay. What if the most important, powerful thing in the room isn't the gold, but the thing that is holding it together? Food for thought. That is not a consolation prize. That is a completely different understanding of what power looks like. Okay. Now, let me tell you how the stone actually forms because the geology is not separate from the metaphysics. It is the metaphysics. Chrysocolla is what's called a secondary mineral. It doesn't exist on its own from the start. It forms in the oxidation zones of copper ore deposits. What that means is copper is exposed to the elements, water, oxygen, carbon dioxide. It begins to break down, to weather, to chemically transform. And in that process of dissolution, chrysocolla emerges. This stone is literally born from breakdown. It's a hydrated copper silicate. That beautiful blue-green comes from the copper content. And honestly, I'm obsessed with copper-based minerals in general. And it's almost always found alongside malachite, azurite, and turquoise, all members of the same copper family, all born from a similar process of transformation. And those are like all my favorites. Malachite, azurite, turquoise, love it. They're like green, blue, those intense colors. Something about that I'm so attracted to. You find it in the American Southwest, such as Arizona, New Mexico, in Chile, Peru, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Russia, and critically, in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, which matters enormously, and we're going to get there, okay? That's a big part of it. But I want to stay here for one more moment with this idea of a stone that only exists because something else broke down. Because I think for a lot of us, our most powerful periods of transformation, the moments that actually changed who we are, they didn't begin with radiance, right? They began with a dissolution, with something falling apart, and what Chrysocolla says is the wisdom you carry on the other side of, what is that wisdom that you carry on the other side of that breakdown, right? That is your medicine, and that is the gold glue, right? Like we don't we don't start amazing, right? We usually have to go through like hitting rock bottom or having some sort of crazy transformation, and that is when we bloom, right? So we can really understand Chrysocolla from that perspective. So let's go to the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, specifically to a place called Serabit el-Khadim, an ancient Egyptian mining site that archaeologists date back to at least 2600 BCE. These are some of the oldest organized mines in recorded human history. They were mining for turquoise and copper minerals, including chrysocolla, and the site wasn't just a mine, it was a sacred temple complex dedicated to Hathor. Now, Hathor is one of the oldest and most complex deities in the Egyptian pantheon. She's often simplified in modern references as a goddess of love and beauty. And yes, she is that, but she is also the goddess of music, creative expression, joy, and fertility. She is a protector of minors. She is a guide of the dead. She holds enormous paradox. She is both the tender and the destroyer. She is the container for the full range of human experience. And the miners who extracted these copper stones, who extracted what would become Chrysocolla, they didn't just work at her site. They worshipped there. The stones were sacred to her. The act of mining was a devotional act. This is the pre-Christian origin of Chrysocolla's association with feminine wisdom, not a soft communication, not calming energy. Hathor, who holds grief and joy with equal hands. Hathor, who was there when you were born and there when you died. That is the original spirit this stone was considered to carry. Now we can talk about Cleopatra. Historical accounts note that Cleopatra, who was deeply knowledgeable about Egyptian sacred tradition, far more so than many modern portrayals suggest, reportedly wore and gifted Chrysocolla. She understood it as a stone of strategic eloquence, of influence. And I want to be precise about what that means because it's easy to romanticize Cleopatra and dismiss the point. She was a woman who ruled an empire, who navigated the most dangerous political environment of her time, who spoke 9 languages, who was a student of philosophy and theology. She was not soft. She was not calming. She was precise. She knew exactly when to speak, exactly what to say, and this is the part that gets left out. She knew exactly when to say nothing. And we'll come back to that. Okay, so in the American Southwest, among the Pueblo people and other indigenous traditions, Chrysocolla has been called a grandmother stone. And I want to be careful here because I'm working from what has been shared publicly and I don't want to claim more than I know. But the framing itself is profound. Grandmother, not mother, not maiden, grandmother, the one who has already lived through it, the one who has already been broken down and reconstituted, the one whose wisdom doesn't need to announce itself because it's been earned at a price and you can see it in her eyes. 3 cultures, ancient Egypt, classical Mediterranean, indigenous North America, all landing on the same archetypal energy for this stone. And that's not a coincidence. That's a teaching trying to get through. Okay, so let's talk about the throat chakra piece. You'll find this is where most people in the crystal world kind of get hung up. And I think this is a piece where some people are kind of missing the point about this stone, at least for my research. Every single source you'll find will tell you Chrysocolla is a throat chakra stone. Speak your truth, express yourself, use your voice. And again, that's not wrong. But one of my reference authors, Judy Hall, the queen, says something that I think is actually the more sophisticated teaching from the stone. She writes that at the throat, Chrysocolla improves communication, but helps you to discern when to keep silent. Yeah, when to keep silent, right? Because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In a culture that tells you your healing is about finally saying the thing that you've been holding back, Chrysocolla is offering a more nuanced teaching. It's not just about finding your voice, it's about developing the discernment to know what your voice is actually for. Because there's something that doesn't get discussed enough in spiritual spaces. Not every truth needs to be spoken out loud. Some truths are more powerful when they're held. When you know something that the room doesn't know, that's not silence from fear, that's silence as a strategy. That's the kind of silence that Cleopatra wielded. The crystal community often frames silence as suppression, as something to be healed, and sometimes that's true, but Chrysocolla is pointing at something different. It's pointing at the silence of deep knowing, the silence that comes not from having nothing to say, but from understanding that your knowing doesn't require external validation to heal. And here's the alchemical layer I really want you to have. Copper is the metal of Venus. In classical astrology and alchemy, copper corresponds to love, beauty, relatedness, the creative principle, and chrysocolla is what copper becomes when it weathers, when it breaks down and oxidizes and transforms. Chrysocolla is, in a very literal chemical sense, what Venus looks like after dissolution, after she's been through it. And the astrological associations confirm this. Cassandra Eason, in her book, links Chrysocolla to Taurus, which is Venus ruled, and we are in Taurus season now. So we're staying in that same energy. But it's not the Venus of the beginning standing in her shell, fresh and untouched. It's the Venus who has lived, who has loved and lost and been remade, who has had her gold broken apart and learned to be the thing that holds it back together. That's a very different quality of love, a very different quality of wisdom, and I would argue a far more powerful one. I also want to share something from Cassandra Eason's work that stopped me cold when I read it, okay? She notes that Chrysocolla specifically counters ageism directed toward women, particularly in media and publicity careers. I need you to sit with the fact that a crystal reference text is making a direct political statement about the erasure of older women's voices from public life, okay? That's not an accident. That's not generic communication energy. That's a very specific naming of a very specific kind of violence. We live in a culture that tells women that their voice has an expiration date, that your wisdom is most valuable when your body is youngest, that visibility belongs to a particular season of womanhood. And after that, you're supposed to step back, be soft, be grandmotherly in the dismissive sense rather than the sacred sense. Chrysocolla, a stone literally named for the substance that holds gold together, is the energetic antidote to that lie. This is a stone for the woman who has been told her time has passed and who knows at a cellular level that she is just getting started. Cassandra Eason also notes that Chrysocolla helps men express vulnerability. And I want to offer this not as a contradiction to the feminine framing, but as a completion of it. This stone isn't coded feminine because it's only for women. It's coded feminine because it carries the qualities that patriarchy has designated as feminine and then systematically devalued in everyone. Emotionality, relatedness, the willingness to be affected, the wisdom that comes from breakdown rather than conquest. When Chrysocolla helps a man access vulnerability, it's restoring something that was taken from him. And that's not softness, that's wholeness. There's one more layer that I need to name, and it connects directly to Chrysocolla's healing work with survivors of abuse and trauma. Judy Hall, she notes that Chrysocolla alleviates guilt and brings in joy. Ethan notes it aids in recovery from domestic violence, incest, and sexual abuse. Guilt is one of the primary mechanisms by which silenced people stay silent, not because they don't know the truth, but because somewhere along the way they were taught that their truth was dangerous, was too much, was something to be managed rather than expressed. And Chrysocolla, the stone born from breakdown, the stone that forms in the space where copper used to be, it specifically targets that program. It doesn't just encourage communication, it dissolves the chemical residue of guilt that keeps people from trusting their own perception in the first place. That's not a gentle stone, that's a stone doing serious alchemy. So how do we actually work with this stone? Here's what I have to offer. Chrysocolla is associated with the throat and heart chakras, but also notably with the thyroid, the lungs, and the female reproductive system. If you're working through hormonal transitions, puberty, perimenopause, menopause, Chrysocolla has a long history of being worked with for those exact thresholds. These are moments of chemical dissolution and reconstitution. This stone knows that territory. Hold it at the throat during meditation, place it on the heart. If you're working with the thyroid, specifically at the base of the throat. If you are someone who struggles to trust your own perception, if guilt shows up as a default response before you've even assessed the situation, this is your stone. Carry it, sleep with it, let it work on the program, not just the symptom. If you're someone who uses words to manage, to perform, to fill silence, try working with Chrysocolla as a practice in strategic silence. Sit with it and ask, what do I know right now that doesn't need to be spoken? What truth am I holding that is more powerful as presence than as an announcement? And here's the challenge that I want to leave with you this week. Find one conversation, one moment where your instinct is to explain yourself, justify yourself, or fill a silence that is making you uncomfortable, and instead stay in the gold glue. Be the thing that holds the space. Notice what information comes to you from that position that wouldn't have come to you if you'd been speaking. You don't have to do this forever. You don't have to become silent. This is not about suppression. This is about discovering what it feels like to hold power in a room without needing the room to confirm it. That's the Chrysocolla teaching. Not use your voice, but know what your voice is for. Chrysocolla, born from the breakdown of copper, named for the substance that holds gold together, worshipped at Hathor's mines for thousands of years, carried by Cleopatra, called grandmother by the people who lived on the land where it forms. This is not a gentle communication stone. This is a stone for people who have been through it, who have been dissolved and reconstituted, who carry the kind of wisdom that doesn't need to perform itself because it has been earned. If Chrysocolla has been calling to you, I want you to consider the possibility that it's not calling you to speak more. It might be calling you into a more sophisticated relationship with your own knowing, into the kind of power that holds everything together without anyone in the room even realizing you're doing it. That's the gold glue. And this stone has been teaching it for a very, very long time. And thank you so much for being here. You guys, I have been isolated and shut out of my social media for like almost a week. So please let me know what you think of this episode. Let me know if it resounded with you in any way. I am like reflecting back on when that Chrysocolla oracle card was pulled for me. And it was really at a time where like I was trying to find my voice in some way. But I was also like really reflecting on my life at that time and not just spewing everything out. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you. Thank you for being patient with me last week, letting me recover. I'm back. And go out and get some Chrysocolla. It comes in so many different forms. I'll take some pictures of my Chrysocolla. I didn't bring any with me on my trip. So I'll take some pictures of the pieces that I have at home because it comes in lots of different ways. Tumbled, raw, botryoidal, like it's very cool. So anyway, bye. Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.mama.ash or at Bid Crystal Energy Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps this magic reach more curious souls. Until next time, keep your crystals close and your intuition closer.